All right, welcome to the Monday edition of the Carl Jackson Podcast. We got a lot to talk about today. First off, I want to start with this nonsense that happened over the weekend. Did you know some sellouts in the GOP Senate, some elites, are trying to take our guns too? I'm going to talk about that. Also, the average price of gasoline has risen to over $5 a gallon on a nationwide average. And I'm going to talk to you about a stopped or a would-be shooter in Alabama that was stopped at an elementary school. The headlines, and no one is talking about this. Also, the Democrat Party has moved on from Joe Biden. No one's talking about it. We're going to talk about it on today's edition of the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
All right, welcome to the Carl Jackson Podcast. Listen, let me start here. There was a story that broke over the weekend at Walnut Park, or involving Walnut Park Elementary School, and no one is talking about it. The media isn't talking about it. Why? Because they are hell-bent, along with the Democrat Party and some sellout elites in the GOP Senate that are trying to that are coming after our guns. It's as simple as that. And I'm sorry for those of you that say, Carl, you're going too far. You're going too far, calling these GOP members sellouts, calling them elites. These guys are on our team. No, they are not. No, they are not. Listen, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the rule of law. They are the rule of law in this nation. These senators, whether they are in the GOP or whether they are in the Democrat Party, have no business trampling on our God-given rights. Everything that they've proposed, and we're going to get into that, will do nothing and have done nothing in the past to stop or curtail evil, because they want to continue talking about symptoms rather than the disease or diseases. And that is a lack of God, the lack of fatherhood across America, and the fact that we have soft on crime DAs all across the country. The Republicans and the Democrats aren't dealing with any of this stuff, not to mention trying to take away our God-given rights to be able to defend ourselves is absolutely stupid when you consider that annually there are over 2 million good gun defenses every year that aren't talked about. That aren't talked about. They don't make the headlines because they don't fit the narrative. They don't fit the agenda that, guns are bad, guns are killing people. All the while, what the left is trying to do, and now we have sellouts in the Republican Party and the Senate that are acquiescing right along with these guys. These guys want to be tyrants on the left. They want to be dictators, and the GOP Senate is helping them right along, playing into this emotional game. So here's a story, hat tip the Federalist. While Democrats, the writer says, turns out we don't need celebrity lectures and gun control to keep kids safe. We just need locked doors and adults who do their dang jobs. And, Ted Cruz was mocked for this when he talked about the Uvalde shooting and said, listen, lock the freaking doors. We have locked doors, and we have police officers that are willing to act, then we're going to stop a lot of these school shootings if these criminals get past all of the other things, like a legal background check, like the shooter in Uvalde had. So the columnist goes on to say, Kylie Zimpel, while Democrats continue exploiting the Uvalde shooting, victims to prattle on about, quote, assault weapons, close quote, and so-called, quote, common sense gun control. Another school was attacked on Thursday, but it won't make the headlines. And as a matter of fact, it hasn't made the headlines. You can only find it on some conservative media outlets. And she goes on to say that's because this school, Walnut Park Elementary in Gadsden, Alabama, didn't have any victims except the would-be invader, who was shot dead by police after he tried and failed to bust into the building. Here's how it all reportedly went down. She explains, a passerby saw a man aggressively, quote unquote, trying to get into the school building. When the man was unsuccessful, he tried other doors, all of which were locked. The responsible observer called to report the man. The school principal put the building on lockdown and called in a police officer who doubles as a school resource officer. And that after an officer called for backup. If the reports are correct, the chain of command worked smoothly thanks to decisive action and quickly followed protocols. Now, I will say this, in light of what happened in Uvalde, perhaps schools are on alert. But the truth of the matter is, locking doors goes a long way. It may be just enough time to stop a shooter or deter a shooter long enough for cops to be able to get on the scene, or someone with a weapon, another firearm, to be able to get on the scene and pop a cap in that shooter's behind. And I think justice should start and end right at the school site if there's a shooter there. I'm tired of these guys living and spending years in jail and prison. If they are going to shoot up our kids, shoot them dead on the spot. No need for them to live another second, in my opinion. The columnist goes on to say the resource officer reportedly engaged the would-be invader, who then also allegedly attempted to forcefully enter a marked police vehicle and to take the officer's gun. More police officers rushed to the scene to help, and the assailant was shot and killed. According to the city's school superintendent, the school children, listen to this, who were there, quote, seemed to be unaware the incident even occurred, or the incident occurred, close quote. In other words, a man who aggressively tried to break into a school and take the firearm of a police officer was stopped because doors were properly locked and police officers acted bravely and urgently. So that's the first story. So we had this shooting, or would-be shooter at Walnut Park, elementary school. He was thwarted by locked doors, a chain of command where the principal of the school gave a lockdown order, and the school resource officer had a confrontation with him. He tries to take a gun from the police officer from a cop car. He ends up dead. All right, so that's a story. You're not hearing about that. Now, all of this, I want you to understand, is leading up to the sellouts that are in the GOP Senate. I expect Democrats to behave like Democrats. I expect leftists to behave like leftists, right? It's the same thing like I'm a Christian, in the Christian faith. I don't expect non-believers to act like Christians. I don't expect them to care because they're not Christian. But when you say that you're a Republican, I expect for you to stand up for the Republic, not to bow down and to acquiesce to a bunch of people that are, a bunch of emotional beings that are trying to take away or to diminish or to dilute our God-given right to be able to defend ourselves in the most efficient way possible, and that is with a firearm. When they know the nonsense that the left is spewing is a complete and utter lie. Now, let me go to this. Average price of gas surpasses $5 a gallon for the first time in U.S. history. I'm giving you these stories because the GOP sellouts have no business aiding the far left-wing radicals, including Joe Biden. No business. They have all the ammo they need to flip the script and make the Democrats run for the hills in 2022 and 2024. But if you leave it up to Republicans, they seem to want to sell us out every single freaking time when we have an opportunity of a lifetime to turn this country back to our Constitution. And you have these cowards in the Republican Party that yet again are willing to sell us out. Listen to this story. Hat tip, just the news. Average U.S. gas prices crossed a once unthinkable threshold on Saturday, surpassing $5 a gallon for the first time in U.S. history, to further pinch Americans reeling from the impacts of soaring inflation. So let me just take a quick pause here. So let I get this straight. All right, so we have a nation that is in pain, reeling from the pain of the Joe Biden gas increase and the Democrat gas increase, and you have Republicans willing to go along with the Democrats in order to sell us out on the Second Amendment, when they should be talking about way more Americans are impacted by the gas prices, by the rising food costs. I pass by. There's a car lot that I'll just visit on occasion locally here, and I'll dream. I only look at used cars typically. Used cars are ridiculously priced right now because there just isn't a lot of supply. So those things are up 30, 40% on some, in some instances worse even. in some instances. I went to a car lot, just drove through it. It's a big enough car lot. You can kind of drive through it. I would go there sometimes and just look at the used inventory on the lot. But I got to tell you, I went this time over the weekend. I just wanted to see what was there. I wanted to dream. I have an older model used car. I look forward to turning it in and getting something better, or selling it, I should say, and getting something better in the future, but I can't afford it. And not to mention, there's no supply. So I drive through this car lot. There isn't one used car on the lot. There isn't one used car on their used car lot. All they had were new cars that were spaced out, some still wrapped in, some of the plastic that comes on the new vehicles when they've just been shipped. Unbelievable. And then there was a gas station, a gas station that was right across the street from the car lot that always seemed pretty full. When I remember passing it in the past, completely shut down, boarded up. The last time I saw it, it was popping, and now just shuttered, just gone. My wife and I go to Chili's last night, a local Chili's here. I could have sworn there were maybe 2 servers, maybe 3 in the entire establishment. The server said there just wasn't enough help. People didn't want to come to work. People didn't want to apply. He had a great attitude, but he was just stating a fact. This is what Americans are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And you have GOP. Again, I don't blame the left for acting like the left, but I can't stand sellouts in the Republican Party that'll acquiesce to the far left radical element. These aren't even Democrats. These are leftists. And you got the sellouts in the Republican Party acquiescing. I go on with this story on Just the News, where the average price of gas has surpassed $5 a gallon. The Auto Club AAA announced a new milestone as evidence emerged across the country that rising fuel prices on Biden's watch were becoming a political liability for Democrats heading into the midterm elections and altering American summer plans. Here's some polling. This from Rasmussen. Polling showed a majority of voters now blame Democrat policies for the soaring fuel prices and were altering life plans from travel to retirement. Please remind me while we're messing around with the Democrat Party again, instead of just straight up steamrolling them, as we should be. These people are destroying the country. Why should we participate in it? Rasmussen reports said its latest national survey found that 57% of Americans say the rising price of gasoline has affected their summer vacation plans. Now, I know some of you guys are saying, well, I don't go on vacation, so that doesn't affect me. Well, it affects them. Well, it affects them. And as more and more Americans are being impacted by the high gas prices, guess what? They're going to want to blame somebody for it. Who are they going to want to blame? They're going to want to blame the people that are in power. The Democrats control the White House. They control the Senate. They control the House of Representatives. They have no excuses. And still, here come the Republican Party in to try to save the day for the Democrat Party. This is intentional. This isn't intentional. The Democrats have admitted it. They want us to transition out of fossil fuels into electrical vehicles where they can control us better, where they can virtue signal. Meanwhile, they'll still travel on their private jets, go to whatever places they want to. They'll use their private yachts. But yet they want us to transition. Why? Because it's about power. We can't even afford, far too many Americans can't even afford electrical vehicles that aren't even better for the environment in the first place. But the goal is to eventually get us into mass transportation and convince us to leave rural areas and suburbs and survive in close quarters, in urban communities, in metropolitan communities, so that they can control us, so that they can keep watch on us more easily. So don't mistake it. This is completely intentional. The pain that you're feeling at the pump, the grocery stores with the empty shelves, high prices, all of this is intentional. I want to just remind you, I went over this a couple of weeks ago. This was a report from Washington Post where they where in the Washington Post it was written, if the Biden administration cared about high gas prices, they would be doing everything in their power to increase domestic production. After a federal judge invalidated an offshore oil and gas lease sale in January, the administration chose not to appeal and has since canceled 3 transactions in the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of Alaska, taking millions of acres off the auction block, according to the Washington Post. The Post called the move a, quote, a victory for climate activists intent on curbing U.S. fossil fuel leasing, close quote. It's intentional. It's intentional. The quote goes on. This effectively ends the, and I'm quoting, the possibility of the federal government holding a lease sale in coastal waters this year, close quote. Worse, the administration is about to let the nationwide offshore drilling program expire this month, without a new plan in place. The pain at the pump is intentional. Do not allow Democrats to lie about it. So instead of capitalizing on this narrative, the GOP senators, the sellouts, and I'll name them shortly here, are helping the Democrats in their agenda to disarm Americans incrementally, little by little. Man, wouldn't it be nice if we had Republican senators that wanted to advance the cause of freedom incrementally instead of helping out the radical left? Wouldn't that be nice? Man, maybe we'll get an opportunity to kick some of their behinds out in 2022 and 2024. Let's primary these people, every single one of them. When the chips are down, we know where these sellouts go. We know where who they are. Let's kick them out. I'm sorry, we do not have time for moderates, RINOs, sellouts, whatever name you want to call them. The country is at stake. We do not have time for games. We don't have time for it. Absolutely amazing. Here's a quote from the Republican National Committee. Biden promised to eliminate, regarding the gas prices, Biden promised to eliminate oil and natural gas. Now families are paying the price for his anti-American energy agenda. Biden's solution: force Americans to drive less or buy an expensive electrical vehicle, close quote. That's just as much what I said. Then you have Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm tried to sound a more positive note, and acknowledging the next few months were going to be difficult, but the gas prices could drop in the fall. Why would gas prices drop in the fall, Senator Granholm, when you guys aren't doing anything to make it happen? These people are just liars. That's all. They just lie to you because they know they'll get sellout Republicans in the Senate to acquiesce. Now, I hope the House doesn't go for it, despite the fact that Nancy Pelosi is running the House. But there are plenty enough Democrats that are concerned or scared about losing their seats in the upcoming midterm elections that may not go for this. So praise God for our system of governance. Hopefully, people in the House will be scared off not to go for it. And in the Senate, there has to be a 60 vote threshold in order to get this stuff passed as well. So for those of you, after I mentioned these sellout Republicans, I want you to call those senators, and I want you to be kind but firm, and I want you to put the pressure on them. I want you to tell them, do not acquiesce to the left to diminish our ability to protect ourselves. Everything that they have mentioned won't do a doggone thing. I know a lot of people are talking about mental health. I'm going to tell you why that nonsense won't work either. Not in the way that it's proposed anyway, in my opinion. So Granholm goes on to say there will be some relief on the horizon, but during the summer driving season, it is going to be rough, no doubt about it, because we have such a demand and supply mismatch on the global market for oil. And that's only because the Biden administration and the Democrats refuse to drill, baby, drill. That's why. That's the shortage. That's the problem. Alfredo Ortiz, president of the small business group Job Creators Network, said rising gas and food prices were altering behavior in a long-term way, forcing Americans to borrow money just to keep afloat and changing the arc of the economy. So instead of having savers now and investors, you're getting more people that are starting to put money that they don't have on a credit card in order to try to escape Biden inflation and the high gas prices. Alfredo Ortiz goes on to say people are now starting to borrow on their credit card to live everyday life. This is a big concern because disposable income is just not going to be there. Guys, this is, I'm telling you what, we are in trouble. Now, here's Here's something else that I want to share with you. Did you guys know that the Democrat Party is moving on from the Biden administration? This is another reason there is absolutely no need whatsoever to work with the Democrat Party. Yet, leave it up to Sellout in the Republican parties to do so. Let me read you a little bit from a column from Politico. I hate to do this, but I need to do this verbatim. I want you to hear what they have to say. I'm telling you, the Democrat Party has moved on from the Biden administration. Biden may not realize it yet, but it's true. Hat tip Politico, all right? A liberal rag. Let's begin with two matters of historical fact. They are indisputable. Now, I want you to understand, they're going to bash Ronald Reagan, so just brave through this, and we'll get through this. All right, let's begin with two matters of historical fact. They are undisputable or indisputable, uncontroversial, and they define the dilemma for Democrats in the next presidential election with stark clarity. First, when Ronald Reagan ran for president in 1980, his age was a serious challenge. If he won, he'd be the oldest elected president ever. 8 years later, when he left the White House after a second term with clear signs of declining abilities, he was younger than Joe Biden was the day he began his presidency. Now, to be fair, I don't know how much of this is true or perceived. I know that was a narrative then, but I wasn't involved in politics, and obviously I was just a young buck fresh out of the mother's womb, not to and just a few previous years before. So I just don't know much about this. So I'm going based upon this as a columnist again from Politico, a left-wing rag. Second, since Alan Barkley failed to secure the 1952 Democratic presidential nomination, every Democratic vice president has eventually wound up as the party's presidential nominee. None of them ever lost a fight for the nomination once they declared, though we'll never know if Hubert Humphrey would have defeated Robert Kennedy in 1968. As Democrats began to think about 2024, if only to cover their eyes from the likely train wreck that the midterms promise, their thoughts can be summarized simply, will he, and I'm quoting, should he, and if not him, who? Speaking of Joe Biden, obviously. In a recent New York Magazine piece, Gabrielle D. Benedetti gathered up the hopes, a few, fears, many, and wide-ranging speculation about a potential Biden re-election campaign. It provided not just yays and nays to the will he, should he questions, but a host of possible replacement candidates that the great majority of Americans have never heard of. Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, Governor Jared Polis of Colorado, Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, fresh from a near defeat at the hands of a dyspeptic electorate. From other corners come calls for Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, or former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu, or Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. Do you understand what I'm reading? The Democrat Party is ready to move on from Biden. This is what they're talking about. They're not talking about, hey, leading up to 2024, we stand a good shot. Leading up to the midterm elections, we stand a good shot of keeping the House and controlling the Senate. They're looking at 2024. They've already moved past 2022 because they're already expecting to get their butts kicked. And so now the Politico is writing columns about, okay, what do we do? Where do we go? Who do we pick in 2024? The column goes on to say all of these suggestions are based on the premise that Vice President Kamala Harris is too damaged politically to be the party's presidential nominee. D. Benedetti notes that her approval rating is 15 points below where Biden stood at this stage in Barack Obama's first term and 11 below Mike Pence under Trump. Close quote, and that she has been burdened by the consistently negative tone of her coverage. Close quote. Now, we know that's a lie. She's been burdened by the fact that she stinks. The lady can't communicate. She doesn't even understand what she's talking about. And she doesn't understand policy. And everyone knows it and everyone sees it. And she's not likable. She's not likable. It's not working for them. Now, he says, now let's return to the two facts I began with. The first tells us that Biden's age is a problem far more serious than the one Reagan faced more than 42 years ago. When Reagan first ran, he was, or at least appeared to be, in fine physical condition. He takes little digs at Reagan where he can. Here's what he looked and sounded like when he began his fall campaign. They have a link. But his mental faculties were challenged through the race. As reporters cited, his conflating of fiction with fact, and his inability at times to remember his own proposals. All right, I'm sure those are digs. By the time he ran for re-election, those doubts grew louder, especially after his first debate, when he stumbled through a number of answers. That debate with Walter Mondale prompted doubts about his acuity, even in conservative outlets like the Wall Street Journal editorial page. He deflected those worries in his second debate with his famous quip that he would not attack Walter Mondale for his youth and inexperience, close quote. You can still find that on YouTube. It got laughs, but there were enough concerns during his second term that his aides began to discreetly ponder the need to invoke the 25th Amendment's tools when facing presidential disability. He goes on, all right, those are his digs for Reagan. He goes on with Biden, the signs of age are more performative than substantive. Now, that's a lie. All right, now he's covering up for Biden. We know that it's substantive. Anybody with a modicum of common sense and decency and honesty will say, when you look at Biden, we know something is cognitively wrong. But even though something is cognitively wrong, we also know that his policies stink, and they're doing great damage and harm to America. A slowing of movement, occasional confusion, he says, over words, lifelong byproduct of stuttering, and the determination of Fox News and other adversaries to portray, sometimes with creative video editing, every verbal stumble as conclusive evidence of dementia or cognitive decline. No, we can all watch Biden in his speeches reading from a teleprompter that he can't even do that well, for God's sakes. But overhanging all of that is the first digit of the age he will be if he runs. Again, at nearly 82, these people are panicking. No candidate has ever run, and no president has ever served at age 80 or above. It's possible to cite any number of figures who are fully capable well into old, even very old age. Pablo Casals was composing and conducting in his 90s. Roger Engel was turning out elegant prose poems to baseball as he neared his centennial. John Paul Stevens was delivering sharp Supreme Court opinions at 90. He says, but the presidency is a very different question. The pitiless demands of the office, age, pretty much everyone who holds the job. Just compare pictures of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama, three of our youngest chief executives at the beginning and end of their tenures. As a personal matter, he says, I am just a few months younger than Biden. I like to think I am more or less in possession of most of my faculties. He says, but the demands on me and my contemporaries are several orders of magnitude less than they are for a president. Then the inexorable impact of age, senior moments, quote unquote, with a phasic-like groping with the proper names of a movie star author, the increased power of gravity afflict more or less all of us at this point in our lives, which is why even among friends most alarmed at the prospect of a second Trump presidency, there's real discomfort about the notion of a president who would be 86 at the end of his term. Among the citizenry at large, according to the Wall Street Journal, less than a third think Biden will run again. Listen, the column goes on, but you get the gist of the column. The Democrats are having problems, and they're wanting to move on. Let me offer this. Let me read this. To offer the compulsory disclaimer, none of this is set in stone. Biden's vitality may get a boost if the national mood brightens or new evidence makes the danger of a Trump second term compelling, which is what the left and the sellouts in the Republican Party, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, is trying to do. They're trying to with January 6th, but it got abysmal ratings. Everyone has moved on from that. Why? Because no one's thinking of January 6th when you're paying $5 a gallon for gas. When you're paying double the price for bread, eggs, if you can find them on the shelves, or milk, if you can find them on the shelves, or baby formula, if you can find them on the shelves. And then the article goes on. If her prospects seem dim enough, Harris could simply choose not to run, though recent polling, likely a measure of name identification, suggests she's the front runner for the nomination if Biden bows out. He goes on to say, listen, Harris sucks, and I'm paraphrasing, Kamala Harris sucks. But imagine the grief if we turn away from a black woman. So at the same time, he bashes Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, in this opinion piece in Politico. He bashes Joe Biden, basically giving the Democrat Party reason to move on. And then he reminds the Democrat Party, listen, she's a black female. We may have a hard time getting rid of her, but they admit she sucks so much. Now, I say all of that to come right back to full circle what the sellouts in the Republican Party are doing, again, to sell out your Second Amendment rights and work with the leftists on the Democratic left. Hat tip Breitbart, bipartisan gun deal announced no assault weapons ban, no raise minimum rifle age. A bipartisan group, didn't they tell us that's what they wanted to accomplish? So they didn't accomplish that, right? They didn't accomplish that, which in my opinion would be unconstitutional, but nonetheless, they didn't accomplish that. So the sellouts in the GOP party decided, listen, there are some things that we can do to help undermine the Second Amendment and help you radical leftists out. We too want to disarm American citizens. Even though we know all of this is straight BS when it comes to America being the nation that leads in mass shootings. You guys go back, listen to the podcast that I did with John Lott. This is a complete and utter lie. The left and researchers conveniently leave out per capita stats. That is the percentage or amount of people killed in quote unquote mass shootings per 100,000 people. If we count those stats accurately and consistently across the globe, America ranks like, I think it's 14, 15, or 16 in the world when it comes to mass shootings under or below other industrial nations, Switzerland, you name it. Some of these other places that people say they don't have issues with. It's absolutely asinine. But again, the bipartisan group of senators, and bipartisan oftentimes just means that you're selling out your principles for partisanship. Bipartisan isn't always a good thing. There are times where it is, but oftentimes it's not a good thing. And in this case, it isn't. So again, the column says a bipartisan group of senators announced a deal on gun control legislation Sunday in the wake of recent mass shootings. Though the compromise excludes Joe Biden's assault weapons ban and a raised minimum age for rifle purchases, the deal includes Republican priorities such as expanded mental health services and school safety. Okay, that sounds good. What does that mean? How are you going to harden schools? Is this going to be a block grant that you're going to send to the schools? Because I don't need the federal government involved in this. We have plenty of money in states and locally to be able to handle this. If states that do need it, maybe they can receive a block grant and they can handle things, accordingly. But they should develop the plans, not the federal government. It nods to Democratic priorities by adding expanded background checks for those under the age of 21. And again, this is complete and utter bullcrap because it doesn't deal with the fact that Democrats don't prosecute crime. They don't prosecute young juveniles in the way that they should. And I'm sorry, if juveniles are violent, you should be able to look at their record when they turn 18 and say, you know what, you've been in juvie for a while. What we're gonna do is hold out on your gun rights until you're 21. I could go along with that, but the problem is you don't have Democrats that want to punish some of these young offenders, especially if they happen to be minority. That's a huge problem. So again, this says it nods to Democratic priorities by adding expanded background checks for those under the age of 21 who will now have juvenile records screened before gun purchases. A press release by the bipartisan group outlines the contours of the proposed legislation. Bipartisan original emphasis added to this. The bipartisan group of senators announced agreement. Who are the GOP's elite sellouts? Let's name them. John Cornyn, Republican of Texas. Guys, kick his butt out of office, please. Kick his butt out of office. I don't know if maybe he's retiring. I don't know. A lot of these guys or some of these guys are on their way out the door from what I understand. The ones that aren't need to be primaried. Tom Tillis, Republican, North Carolina. You got Roy Blunt, Republican, Missouri. You got Richard Burt, Republican, North Carolina. You got Bill Cassidy, Republican, Louisiana. I thought he used to be a good guy. Really did. Susan Collins, Republican, Maine. Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina. You've had Rob Portman, Republican, Ohio, who's headed out. Thank God. Let's get J.D. Vance that seat. Mitt, full of excrement, Romney. From Utah, you got Pat Toomey, who's also out in Pennsylvania. Dr. Oz running for that seat. Here's what the bipartisan commission said today, and I quote, "Today we are announcing a common sense bipartisan proposal to protect American children, keep our schools safe, and reduce the threat of violence across our country." They don't deal with God in the schools. They don't deal with they don't deal with dads that are needed, just symptomatic issues. These symptomatic issues are going to solve the disease. No, I'm sorry, they're not. They got this stuff completely backwards. They also say they want to reduce the threat of violence across the country. Families are sacred, and it is our duty to come together and get something done. Get something done. Those are those infamous words that will help restore their sense of safety and security in their communities. Our plan increases needed mental health resources. So just money. Give out money for mental health. I'll tell you why that's a fallacy. Improves school safety and support for students, and helps ensure dangerous criminals and those who are adjudicated as mentally ill can't purchase weapons. Most importantly, our plan saves lives while also protecting the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. If this plan saves lives, why hasn't it before? Because this is exactly what they do in blue cities, and we all know that crime is up. You freaking hypocrites. We look forward to earning broad bipartisan support and passing our common sense proposal into law. Quote, the proposal includes support for state crisis. And here's some. Intervention orders provides resources to states and tribes that create and administer laws that help ensure deadly weapons are kept out of the hands of individuals whom a court has determined to be a significant danger to themselves or others, consistent with state and federal due process and constitutional protections. How about we just enforce the laws that are already on the books? How about we do that? If we did that, I suspect that crime would lessen in America, like it had been for over 2 decades before these liberals gone wild start talking about gun control and these the Democratic riots of 2020, where they used the useful idiots in BLM and Antifa. And another thing, investment in children and family mental health services, national, and they say here that's the second thing they want, a national expansion of community behavioral health center model, major investments to increase access to mental health and suicide prevention programs and other supportive services available in the community, including crisis and trauma intervention and recovery. Okay, so that sounds really good, right? So we want to improve or we want to invest in children in mental and family mental health services. Are these the same mental health counselors that are down for chopadicophomies for boys that want to be girls or girls that want to be boys? Are these the same mental health counselors that we're going to be counting on? You see why morality plays a huge part in this stuff? You see why they're just dealing with symptoms and not dealing with the real diseases, which in my opinion is God, guys, and I'm talking about fatherhood and guns, good people with guns. More guns, less crime. John Lott writes about it in his book. Go out, read the book. This is all a bunch of nonsense. Protections for victims of domestic violence. Now, this I do agree with. Convicted domestic violence abusers and individuals subject to domestic violence, restraining orders are included in NICS, including those who have or have had a continuing relationship of a romantic or intimate nature. All right, so that's the 1, 2, 3. Third thing, funding for school-based mental health and supportive services. Again, who are the counselors? Who are the counselors? Funding for school safety resources, counselors that don't, and counselors that don't value life. You know, I'm not saying there aren't good counselors out there. I know there are, but this stuff needs to go to block grants. And the first thing that we should do is plug the hole, right? You got a sinking ship. First thing you do is plug the hole. How do we plug the hole? That is to harden our schools. That's the first thing that should be done before we talk about anything else. That's why I don't take these fools seriously. Funding for school safety resources. This invests in programs to help institute safety measures in and around primary and secondary schools, support school violence prevention efforts, and provide training to school personnel and students. I guess is there a bill that provides for funding daddies? I don't know. Clarification is the next one clarification of definition of federally licensed firearm dealers. Do you mean to tell me there are people that are applying for a federally licensed firearms to be dealers that shouldn't be? Isn't that your job to fix that out? You're providing clarification for this. Telehealth investments is the next one. Invest in programs that increase access to mental and behavioral health services for youth and families in crisis via telehealth. All right, so you can provide all the resources you want if you don't have people locally on the ground that are really involved in stopping crime first and foremost, weeding out those that may be mentally insane on a local level. This isn't going to work. Under 21 enhanced review process. I was listening to Mark Walters of Armed American Radio. If you can listen to his show from last night, I suggest you do so. Says for buyers under 21 years of age requires an investigative period to review juvenile and mental health records, including checks and state databases and local law enforcement. All right, so here's the thing. 99% of people purchasing guns at the age of 18 are legit, are cool, are not criminals, are not crazy, are not mentally ill. So we're going to deter people that we say, listen, you can you can do whatever you want. You can mutilate your bodies. You can go fight a war, but you can't buy firearms at the age of 18. So 99% of the people are going to be subject to this enhanced review when they're quote unquote adults. This doesn't make sense to me. How about the ones that have already gone through the juvie process? How about the ones that have already been reported to cops? So how about we keep our eyes on them and call it a day? Unbelievable. Penalties for straw purchasing. A straw purchase is a person who makes a purchase on behalf of another person. I'm telling you, this is a way to circumvent fathers that want to pass on their weapons to their sons or their daughters. That's what they're trying to get at. That's the crux of the issue. They say it cracks down on criminals who illegally straw purchase and traffic guns. So, there was that situation where Kyle Rittenhouse, his friend, purchased a gun for him, that AR-15, and he would allow him to use the weapon in his presence. So they want to be able to crack down on stuff like that. But if they're law-abiding citizens, all they're trying to do is crack down on private sales. That's the end goal. And now you have sellouts in the Republican Party that I mentioned earlier that are doing their best to undermine the Second Amendment as well in order to appease the radical leftists. They're being emotional too. It's unbelievable. Guys, we got a fight ahead of us. I want you to call your senators. I want you guys to get involved in this political process. Not only is it the radical left that is a threat to our Constitution in the United States of America, but also weak-kneed Republicans we're finding out. Call the senators. If you're listening to this podcast and your senator is one of the sellouts, make sure you give them an earful. I want you to be as respectful. I shouldn't say kind, but I want you to be as respectful but forceful as possible when you call their offices. And I want you to tell them to back away from this. None of the stuff they mention will make one iota of a difference. Let's start with one practical thing that will, and that is hardening the schools first. Once we do that, we can talk about block grants for mental health and what that looks like exactly. So money isn't wasted for nothing. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Podcast. Make sure you check me out on social media, wherever I am on social media. I told you last week we were transitioning to one name. Scratch that. The Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me. The Carl Jackson Show across social media platforms. The only one that's slightly different is Twitter, just because we couldn't use as many letters. So that's at Carl Jackson Show on Twitter. Everywhere else, that's The Carl Jackson Show. The Carl Jackson Show across social media. Find me wherever you listen to your podcast: Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble. The Carl Jackson Show. The Carl Jackson Show. Guys, until next time, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you. See you tomorrow.